Hello? Casting. Casting. There we go. I made it! Almost in time. Only running slightly behind my normal schedule, but I'm here. Ate super fast, drank a lot of water, started coughing a bunch, drank more water. I'm so ready. So hi. So ready, so set. I definitely didn't run myself super late because I was staying late after work writing in a new book and lost track of time because I wanted to finish the chapter I was working on, which I did, but then also it meant that I got home like 5 minutes before I normally start stream. So those were choices and decisions that I made. That is true. An unrelated book, but a book. Same universe, different planet. We'll let this song wrap up and then we'll go ahead. All right. Last time, we had a very long chapter with Moira following the immediate aftermath of Tazale and Leo's big confrontation in the hospital basement. That climaxed with Leo getting hit by the getaway ambulance. We followed Moira back to Evo's base, where everyone, being super tired, dumped their load and disappeared. Naomi was rather upset that her boyfriend, Rolf, was left behind during the incident. Wanted to go back for him, but was shot down and stomped off to her room fuming. A couple other guys crashed on couches. Tazale went back to the kitchen, and Moira, with her jacket and pants stuffed absolutely full of stolen shimmer canisters, decided that she wanted a little more information out of Tazale before she left. So she went back to the kitchen and they had a nice long talk, discussing their differences, discussing their similarities, which there aren't many, but there are a few, discussing the rampant inequality within the bulb, within the city of Cyphus, and what could be done about it. Along the way, some secrets spilled out. Tazale revealed that he could smell his mother on Moira's clothing, and that he was rather upset to find this out because why on earth was she having anything to do with his mother? She was upset that he was here and freaking out because why was he here when his mother's doing all this? Uh, it escalated, and he figured out that she was stealing shimmer because she fell and spilled a bunch on the floor. This led to a fight, and magic got slung around, and she was told to never come back to Evo again. Went home with her tail between her legs, but her pants full of magic gas. Then we shifted over to Leo, jumping forward in time by a couple weeks, and he's out of the hospital finally. Poor guy only spent an entire section of the book stuck in the hospital, but he's out now. Uh, and now he gets to be a real policeman officer, and it is the most exhausting thing he's ever done. Thankfully, he has Melissa and Tolson to help him try to pick up all the slack and make sure he doesn't drop too many balls. And they went over the files that Tolson recovered that he had caught his uncle burning as his final act as chief. In reviewing them, they learned about a bunch of different Nolfs from a street racing circuit, illegal of course, hover bikes, from about 30 years prior, all of whom had been arrested by police officer Walter Bradburn, went to jail because of police officer Walter Bradburn, and then got recommended to be let out on good behavior by police officer Walter Bradburn. So that's all normal and fine, I'm sure. But they realized that one of them, Salatra, is their killer. They ID'd her as Naira, the alchemist, who Chief Walter Bradburn put on this case. And also realized that there's a little bit more history there than they initially remembered. Specifically than Leo initially remembered. Turns out the reason that Leo is so messed up around guns and so shy about his duty and not trusting himself as a police officer, he may have accidentally shot Naira's kid. So that was a lot to unpack last time. But again, he had friends. They talked about it. The terrible things that you never want to have to experience as a police officer, but that you always risk by doing the job. But they recommitted themselves to doing what they can to do what's right. So now we're picking up with Naira, who is still locked up at Renetta's house. Even when I don't drink soda, I can't tell if it's the nervousness or the speed at which I'm drinking water. Anyway. Chapter 25. Healing Me Softly. Naira stared dumbfounded at the miniature horse prancing about on the kitchen countertop. The horse stood only about 6 inches tall. Orange flames composed the body, while the mane and tail were a lighter yellow shade that verged on white. It seemed to her that visualization was still a faster and more direct method than verbal commands, but seeing this, she had to admit that Moira's method was surprisingly effective. Now split in two, Moira sang along to some song that only she could hear. From the shimmer in her own system, Naira could sense as the Fyram reaction accepted the instruction. In her mind's eye, she saw it split down the middle, each resultant half growing smaller to conserve mass and energy. But Moira wasn't sculpting them visually, as Naira had to do. She was telling it to do so, though she seemed to prefer to think of it as asking, so that she could pretend the magic was responding to her of its own free will. That was nonsense. Energy was energy. It was a force, but it was not alive. It was calculable, repeatable, and controllable. It was responsive to input, but all chemical reactions were that way. However, one glimpse at Moira's growing smile silenced the boring teacher side of Naira. Moira's every interaction with magic filled her with such visible and genuine joy. Who was Naira to burst her bubble? The flames dwindled as they danced and eventually died, leaving streaks of black char that circled fragments of spent Fyrum crystal piled on the counter. After being pestered daily, Naira had finally caved and made a pair of Fyrum crystals for Moira. They contained small enough amounts of sulfur to silence Naira's worries about the girl setting herself or anything else on fire. Or worse, flooding the corner of the kitchen that had become their dedicated lab space with poisonous sulfur dioxide. Generally, you wanted to add something to the sulfur so it couldn't react with the oxygen in the air, but for small amounts, this was fine. Moira had, of course, wanted to make more. Based on how easily she'd tracked down hundreds of canisters of medical-grade shimmer, Naira was very careful what ingredients she taught Moira about. She had little doubt the girl could and would buy anything Naira mentioned. Best not to tempt fate. Besides, with Renetta's private security force on site, there was an even easier source of Fyrum available. Every bullet they carried had tiny paired Fyrum and Aurum crystals in the casing. These high-concentration crystals imparted both energy and momentum to the bullet when the hammer struck. They were designed in such a way that you couldn't accidentally set them off by dropping them, or even intentionally with a finger. Sure, you could use a hammer and a very narrow punch, or the end of a paperclip or a pushpin, which would result in the reaction going off in your hand and the bullet going wherever it pleased. But, with a bit of care, you could remove the bullet from the casing, recover the crystals, and use them as they were. However, experience had taught Naira that it was often better to just use them to give a little extra kick to a lower concentration crystal. Point was, she wasn't going to share this with Moira. Last thing she needed was to have to explain to Renetta Dolahan why the daughter Naira was supposed to be guarding had somehow shot herself without a gun. How do we make the reaction last longer? Moira flicked a few chunks of broken orange crystal. Batteries last a lot longer than these do. Math. That's the direct answer, anyway. Moira groaned, like most of Naira's students had over the years. Everyone liked the flashiness and excitement of alchemical reactions, but most lacked the patience to do the math to do it safely. And while it hadn't taken long to realize that math really wasn't Moira's calling, the girl did have a remarkable memory for memorizing names of elements and key reactions. Naira had drawn up a periodic table for her to reference, but she hadn't needed it after the 4th day. Naira shrugged. There is a trade-off involved. The more energy produced by your reaction, the shorter it will be. Conversely, the less energy your reaction produces, the longer it should last, generally speaking. You can make the higher energy ones last longer, but you need more potent reactants to pull that off. Usually, those are rare, expensive, or both. But for 90% of reactions, your ratios will determine the reaction rate. You mentioned batteries. Batteries are designed to be consistent but low sources of energy. Otherwise, people would need to fill up their cars daily. Batteries also have the additional aid of metal shielding to keep excess energy loss to a minimum. When working with crystals like these, we're inevitably going to have some loss. Energy that escapes before we can harness it and direct it. But metal keeps it contained for longer, as the energy tends to just bounce off. Which is why we should get you a catalyst. It's the safer way to handle reactions. That got Moira's attention. She was listening, just not always to the words. However, the word safe tended to grab her. Why? Seems like I'm handling them pretty safely without one. Because, right now, I'm handling the math to make sure that the crystals you're practicing with are safe. Moira scowled. Yeah, but I'm making them too. Oh, yes. It was impossible to stop Moira from helping with the crystallization process. The girl was eager to learn, in a hands-on way that Naira understood well. But she didn't have the careful patience that Naira had formed after too many times of a reaction trimming her claws or fur for her. More than once, Naira had watched Moira fill a measuring cup, only to leave it a little below the rim or overflowing by as much as 10%. She did better with liquids, where she could eyedropper things in, but even there, sometimes she seemed to lose count. Surprisingly, she did best of all when she had shimmer or prism in her system. It was then that she said she could hear the reactants coming together and approaching different harmonies. She compared it to baking, where some people just had a feel for how much of this to put in when you'd already added so much of that. Perhaps the girl did have some kind of prismated gift that way, but Naira was still going to do her best to teach her how to do it properly. If Moira learned bad habits by shortcutting, it wasn't going to be because of Naira's teaching methods. That you are, Naira admitted, and you're doing well with it. But I'll feel more willing to let you practice with Fyrum and Electrum once we make you a catalyst. Oh, because the Alchemancer always uses a catalyst. Naira frowned at the name. Ever since returning with the Shimmer, Moira had started calling her that. Naira didn't like the implication it carried that she was somehow unique. The Alchemancer. The last of a dying breed. No, she admitted, brushing the Fyrum fragments into a small waste bin now that they were cooled to the touch. I forget to use it as much as I ought to, and I've got the scars to prove it. Her hands were the obvious ones, and she could trace in the cracks of her padded palms where she'd held an aquam crystal for just a little too long. Sections of scarred skin where fur no longer grew testified to the risk of holding a cracked Fyrum crystal. Curum had made her hand functional again, but it couldn't restore it to 100% of what it should be. And this one? Moira asked, pointing to the thinner patch of flesh connecting Naira's thumb to her forefinger. One of your mother's goons shot me. You attacked us first, Head of Security Marston said indignantly from his chair by the wall. Now that Naira had been released from her cage, he and several other guards watched her in shifts. 3 when she was alone, 5 when she was with Moira. Though today, it was only 4. Maybe they were growing less paranoid that she would do anything aggressive. Naira ignored him. Left a big hole, and I treated it regularly with Curum for the first few days. That patched it over before your mother locked me up without access to Prism or Curum, and now it's healing much more slowly. It'll scar pretty badly, I'm sure, but it's mostly back in working order. Does it hurt? Moira asked. It's still a little tight when I stretch it, but it doesn't hurt that bad anymore, unless I... Naira intentionally pulled back on her thumb with her other hand to stretch it. There was enough pain to make her wince, but not much more. It still earned a reaction from Moira, who looked at her with precious but unnecessary levels of concern. Your breathing changed when you did that. I heard it. I'm not surprised, Naira said with a laugh. It hurt. Yeah, I know. Naira rolled her eyes. Did this girl have to take everything as an insult to her intelligence and ability? But as she looked over at Moira, she saw that wasn't the case at all. There was no indignation in Moira's eyes, and her gaze was fixed on Naira's hand. We made Curum crystals a few days ago. Are they ready yet? Naira considered. These saliva ones take about 6 hours. They form quickly, but the trade-off is that they're low potency. The ones made from isopropyl take about 48 hours if you really want to maximize their efficiency. So yes, they should be ready. Why? I want to try something, was the only response Moira gave as she walked over to the large freezer in the corner. Naira's curiosity grew, her head tilting of its own accord as Moira fished out the appropriate tray of crystals. Returning to the counter, Moira set the tray between them. Which is which? It's easier to tell with other crystals because you can distinguish shades of color, Naira admitted, especially with Prism in your system. Visually speaking, there's a hint of opacity or cloudiness to Curum crystals made from saliva. The stronger the antiseptic you use as the base, the more transparent the crystal will be. which is especially noticeable at the tips. Moira pulled out 2 crystals, holding them both up to the electrum light overhead. Naira identified them within seconds, and did her best to hide her smile. Her pupil's brow furrowed as she looked between the 2. Then she took turns holding them to her ears. They're not identical, but they're very close. I'm having a hard time... Moira frowned. Oh, they're both isopropyl, aren't they? Releasing her smile, Naira nodded. Correct. After putting them back, Moira quickly checked the other crystals until she found the ones she wanted. She examined this one more closely, observing the minuscule bubbles and thin, mist-like trail trapped inside. Low grade? She asked. Low grade, Naira confirmed. Holding it up to her ear, Moira closed her eyes and nodded. Good. I want to get a feel for it. By now, Naira knew what Moira meant by this, and sat there in silence as her student hummed quietly. The girl was a unique case, at least in Naira's experience. Naira had taught Nolfs and Sneppards alike in the past decade, and they'd all learned to visualize magic like she did. Moira was the first person she'd taught who could hear the magic. Naira had been skeptical at first, but once she'd watched a demonstration of how an alchemical reaction responded to the girl's singing, it was hard to deny. Now she wondered if other Sneppards she taught in the past had been able to hear it too. Part of her wanted to know what it was like, but strain as she might, she didn't hear anything out of the ordinary, even with Prism. I'm pretty sure I've got it, Moira announced, drawing Naira out of her thoughts. Got what? Kurum's song. May I see your hand? Naira hesitated for only a moment, then took a seat on a stool at the kitchen counter. As Moira sat down on the stool beside her, Naira held out both hands, palm up. Curiosity was a part of herself she'd never learned to ignore. She wouldn't be an alchemist if she didn't have a healthy sense of curiosity. Reaching out, Moira gripped Naira's injured hand like it was an egg that might crack if her fingers pinched it too tightly. I need to hear your song for a bit. Can you hum something, or say ah, like doctors make you do? The longer you sustain it, the better. Opening her mouth a crack, Naira hummed a quiet ah. It turned into a yelp as Moira tugged on her thumb, stretching the injured patch of skin. Sorry, Moira muttered. I need to compare your normal song to your injured one. Well, don't dare anything in the process, Naira laughed. Very attached to my thumb, and I'd like to keep it that way. She winced as Moira tugged again, but gentler this time. When Moira shot her a look, Naira realized she'd fallen silent and started humming again. Holding the crystal up by her ear, Moira started to hum as well. After a few moments, she cracked the crystal and brought it down to rest sandwiched between her palm and Naira's. Moira's hum began to rise and fall like gentle waves after throwing a hefty rock into the ponds. Warmth enveloped Naira's hand as the crystal inside began to glow. The melody was beautiful and soothing, holding the same comfort as a mother's kiss after telling her child they were going to be all right. It was entrancing, and Naira found her vision blurring as she focused on it. They sat like this for a few minutes. During that time, the room disappeared, the scoffing head of security now forgotten. The guards plating cards to the side faded away. There was just the warmth and that song. A song that seemed to fill her very pores, sending goosebumps up her arms and a shiver down her spine. And she could feel the Kurum responding, could feel her hand reknitting bit by bit in the slow, methodical Kurum way. Moira's song came to an end as the reaction ran out. That's what you hear? Naira asked. The Kurum sings like that. Moira blushed, her tail twitching at the tip as she shrank into her chair. Yes and no. I start by trying to copy what I hear, and then I play off of it. The Kurum has a song, but it doesn't sing. It's the instruments, and I'm the one bringing vocals. What about your hand? How'd it... Her excitement trailed off as she pulled her hand away. Though Naira had felt the magic at work, there was little visual evidence that it had done anything. The broken pieces of crystal lay dull and spent in her palm, but the injured skin between thumb and forefinger looked much the same. Moira looked crestfallen. I really thought I'd done something. I blended the hurt in your song with the Curam's song and felt the magic respond, so why didn't it work? Naira offered a small smile, then reached out to pinch Moira's hand. It was warm. You felt the warmth, right? Moira nodded. Yeah. That means it's working. It's how doctors and nurses learn to tell if they've applied it correctly. You'll only feel Curum giving off heat if it's directed rightly. So why does your hand still look messed up? Naira laughed. If Curum worked like an instant miracle drug, we wouldn't need hospitals. It's an accelerant that encourages the body's own natural healing. But it can't heal scars, and it can't repair something that's dead. Seeing that this did little to encourage her protege, Naira reached out and took a pair of Curum crystals from the rack. They were both impressively clear, a testament to the kind of strong antiseptic you could buy with money and connections. She held them out to Moira. Try these. The look in Moira's eyes said she suspected a trick, but she took the crystals anyway. Taking a fresh dose of shimmer, she cracked the crystals and began the song again. Naira felt the magic take hold once more. If last time had been a gentle touch, this time was a full embrace. Again, Moira continued until the reaction ran out. This time, she had to stop halfway to take another dose of shimmer, which made sense. If breathing was enough to cause loss of shimmer or prism, then singing should have very high losses. Those losses paled when viewed in light of the undeniable effects the singing had. Somehow, the magic felt more targeted than Naira's visualizations had ever produced. As the magic faded and the warmth dispersed, Moira gasped for breath. Her hand swept back a stray silvery bang that had fallen loose. Sorry, she said with an apologetic smile. That song was so much richer than before. If the first crystal was like listening to a song on the radio, the second one was like hearing it on the front row of a live concert. Then her gaze shifted, and she stared down at where her hand still rested over Naira's. Shall we see how you did? Naira asked. With a visible swallow, Moira nodded. Slowly, she took her hand away, and her eyes widened. It wasn't fully healed, but this time the difference was noticeable. What should have taken days had happened in the space of an extended song. Skin that had previously been taut now stretched more effortlessly. And while it wasn't perfect, it no longer hurt when Naira moved it. It didn't even pinch. She shook her head in amazement and smiled. She'd used high-quality Curum before, but they'd always been hasty patch jobs. There was a level of detail and care here that demanded praise. Turning her hand back and forth as she examined it, Naira was growing confident the wound was a few days from being fully healed. By the look of it, it wouldn't even scar. Moira still looked a little disappointed. She didn't realize that she'd just pulled off something Naira had only seen accomplished by practiced surgeons. So Naira gave her a genuine response. That's incredible. Moira's eyes widened. Wait, really? You're serious? Her smile broadening, Naira nodded. I'm going to need to start carrying more of the high-grade stuff. How much did you say it was per bottle? 75 Christum, I think. Mom bought a 10-pack and some other stuff, so I don't remember the exact amount, but it probably comes out to about 75 Christum per bottle. So, not bad. Not bad? Naira blinked, lifting a hand to keep her jaw from hitting the floor. 75 Christum was 2 weeks' worth of groceries for her. Producing one Curum crystal had taken an entire bottle. She remembered now why she'd fallen back on using saliva, the free alternative. Setting the cost aside, the difference in effect between reagents was night and day. Should I have Mom order more? We can probably get it by the case, or pallet. All Naira could do was nod. What was it like to treat that much money like pocket change? The girl hadn't even hesitated. Just said it like it was the obvious follow-up. Hey, Naira. Shaking her head to chase away the lingering thoughts on the gulf between the wealthy and the impoverished, Naira refocused on Moira. Yes? I haven't really thanked you yet. Naira tilted her head. For introducing me to magic. For actually showing me how to do it. For believing me when I said I could hear it. Naira didn't correct her on that last point. She'd smiled and nodded the first few times Moira had suggested it, but Naira hadn't actually believed it until she'd seen it in action. However, there was no reason to spoil the moment. With a polite incline of her head, she said, You are most welcome, Miss Moira. Moira's tail started twitching to whatever internal metronome the girl had. Squirming in her seat on the stool, she wrung her hands together and bit her lip. Then she looked almost ashamed as she asked, I actually did good? That wasn't you helping? Sorry, excuse me. Naira shrugged. Only if tone-deaf humming counts as helping. She smiled and showed off her hand. No, Miss Moira, this was all you. You did it, and you did an incredible job. Pride and embarrassment warred for control of Moira's face. Eventually, pride won out, but only because embarrassment surrendered into the background. Her gaze dropped to Naira's knees. Moira's hands were so conjoined, it looked like she was in danger of twisting her own thumb off. May I? The girl started, then cut off. May you? Naira prompted. Moira shook her head. Sorry, it's stupid. Naira raised an eyebrow. Is it? Sighing, Moira shook her head, but less emphatically this time. Maybe not, but it's embarrassing. Naira let out a laugh. It's basically just the two of us. It can't be that bad. Moira's eyebrows creased in a frown, her tail tip twitching like a conductor at the crescendo of a song. Her fingers tapped the edge of her stool as she averted her gaze. Then with a shake of her head, she hopped off the stool and embraced Naira in a hug. Oh! Naira exclaimed in surprise, looking down at where the end of her nose almost touched Moira's ears. Seed mother, this girl was so young and so delightfully earnest. After only a moment of awkward uncertainty, Naira leaned forward and returned the hug. They held it for longer than Naira expected, and she felt the occasional tremble from the girl. To the side, a chair scraped the ground as head of security Marston hopped to his feet, hand already reaching for his holstered baton. The other guards in the room were looking now, trying to gauge if they should follow his lead. Sighing, Naira shot him a glare as she maintained the embrace. He actually snarled as she patted the back of Moira's head. But he couldn't feel the girl's tears through his shirt. Maybe he could hear her hitching breaths, but he definitely couldn't smell her stress, her frustration, and her relief. Couldn't feel the strength of Moira's fingers digging into his back, feeling enough of the point of the claws to remember they were there, but not enough to puncture skin. Couldn't feel the way she clung, like Naira was going to float away. He must have read something of that in Naira's face, because he stopped moving. To his credit, he waved back the rest of his men. Moira always made light of how little of her mother's attention she'd had in the past few years, but it was clear that hadn't fooled anyone. Today, everyone in the room seemed to acknowledge it, watching quietly from their corners. After about a minute, Moira loosened her grip, and Naira followed her lead. Straightening up, the little alchemist in training offered a half smile, wiping at her eyes with an entire arm. Sorry, she sniffled. That was stupid. Naira smiled and shook her head. Asking for comfort is never stupid, Miss Moira. Moira frowned, wiping more tears away as she shook her head. That sounds so wrong. Naira's instinct to double down was interrupted as Moira inhaled loudly around the snot in her nose and cleared her throat. Everyone around here calls me Miss Moira. Everyone at school calls me Miss Moira. A friend should just call me Moira. A friend should just call me Moira? It wasn't a command, and the inflection in her voice almost made it a question. It wasn't a command, and the inflection in her voice almost made it a question. Like she hoped for an outcome she wanted to have, but expected not to receive. Folding her hands in her lap, Naira inclined her head politely. Very well, Moira. Joy sprang past the tears, and Moira let out a laugh. You're still so bracking formal. Just be yourself. Genuinely caught off guard, both by the swear and the sentiment, Naira gave a soft smile. I thought I was. Moira studied her. Several sniffles later, she seemed to decide on something. She shook her head with another laugh. You're like Sergei. You're just too nice. Naira heard a scoff from Head of Security Marston off to the side of the room. He was under no pretenses about how nice Naira was. It was not a word people often used to describe her, but she maintained her soft smile, quietly responding, I'm really not a very nice person. Moira shook her head, clearly having already made up her mind. Wiping one last tear from the corner of her eye, she cleared her throat again. I'm gonna go clean up in the restroom real fast. Don't go anywhere. Again, it was more a request than a command. Not that Naira really had anywhere to go. Not yet, anyway. So she nodded. I'll be here. Smiling, Moira returned the nod before leaving the room. Though her instincts wanted her to pace, Naira stayed on her stool. There was a lot to digest. So much that she didn't notice the head of security until his hand clamped onto the corner of her shoulder. To her great relief, she didn't flinch, even surprised as she was. She glanced down at the spotted white and gray hand, then looked up to meet Head of Security Marston's eyes. If she'd been standing, she'd be taller, but sitting or standing, If she'd been standing, she'd be taller, but sitting or standing, he was bigger. His face wore a scowl so frequently he'd probably married it. He never went anywhere without it. Touch Miss Moira like that again, and I'll give you the electrified end of my shock baton. Naira's mind shot to the canister of prism in her waistband, to the finished Aurum crystals in a rack just past arm's reach on the counter, the aforementioned stun baton holstered at his hip, though to his credit, he was facing that side of his body away from her. He had learned his lesson. Thinking such aggressive thoughts ignored the fact that working here was a relationship with much untapped potential. With actually good reagents, Naira could experience magic on a whole new scale. She just needed to talk Renetta into buying the very weapons that would be her undoing. Then she could... What, exactly? There were damp spots in the fur of her chest now. She could still feel how desperately those fingers had clung to her. The girl was drowning while her mother obliviously walked the sidelines. Worse, without realizing what she was doing, Naira had dived in to bring her back above water. Moira had thought herself stupid for seeking comfort amidst the growing pressure and loneliness. No, she wasn't the stupid one. Naira was the stupid one for not shutting it down sooner, because now Naira was the one in deep water. When the day came that Naira had to turn on this family to save her own, well, it was like saving Moira from drowning now, knowing that she was going to throw the girl into a much deeper pool later. It would hurt Naira, but it would destroy the kit. And even understanding this harsh reality, knowing that she was only digging the hole deeper and loading that inevitable ending with even more pain, Naira found herself replying, Give it a rest. The girl needed a hug. It's not like anyone else around here ever gives her one. The Snepward narrowed his eyes at her. How this house runs its business is none of your... Naira cut him off. Listen, Mr. Marston. I get that you're upset that I embarrassed you in front of your employer by kicking your rump. And I get that you feel threatened in your position because your employer let me, the dangerous rump kicker, out from behind the bars so that I could do your job for you. Neither of us is thrilled about Renetta's decision-making, so we shouldn't have to pretend that we are. That said, if Moira's been going unnoticed as long as I think she has, then I'm just doing what you and all your little friends failed to do when it mattered most. Marston's lip twitched, whiskers bobbing like fishing lines with a fresh catch. You don't know what you're talking about. That's not the accent. You don't know what you're talking about, he snapped. I'm the reason she allowed herself to cry, but I'm not the reason for her tears. Madame Dolahan has gone above and beyond to ensure that her daughter has everything she needs to be happy and safe. Wow. Whew. Whew. Okay, the two of these accents back to back. Oof. Madame Dolahan has gone above and beyond to ensure that her daughter has everything she needs to be happy and safe. So the girl who just cried in the arms of a relative stranger and who nearly lethally overdosed on Fractal 2 weeks ago is both happy and safe? Naira smirked. I guess you really do have everything under control. She really shouldn't poke the deerhound, but there was a guilty pleasure for her in cutting the legs off of bullies with badges. Marston's lips curled up almost into his nostrils. I psyched myself out. Listen, native, I'm the only... No! Ah! Why do I keep losing the Irish? I'm the one who reports to Renetta on your behavior. So I'm the one. Listen, native, I'm the one who reports to Renetta on your behavior. So I'm the one that gets... We're gonna get through this, guys, I promise. It's just one chapter. So I'm the one that can get you thrown back into that cell. Despite the slur, her smirk widened. She should have tried to restrain it, but in this case, she really didn't care to. At best, you can advise her to do so, but I'm pretty sure that I have an eyewitness who's vouching for me will outshine any report you bring. If you hurt her, I will make the executive decision to put a bullet in your skull. Naira stood then, allowing herself to gloat in the full 4 inches of height she had over this man. Leaning in so that her nose was close enough to pass a static shock with his, she said in a low voice, Not that I'm going to give you a reason, but I'd love to see you try. He maintained a tough face, but the change in his scent betrayed his fear. She'd unnerved him. And why shouldn't she? She'd beaten him in a fair fight before. He'd only beaten her by cheating. The prism was in her waistband. The shock baton was close enough she could grab for it. As long as she didn't kill him, Renetta would probably continue to keep her around. Her fingers itched for action. Salatra wanted revenge. The door to the kitchen burst open a moment later. Guys! Moira shouted, gasping for breath. Mom's live! Naira and Marston stopped glaring at each other long enough to glance at Moira. They were both confused at the interruption, until Naira heard Renetta's voice broadcasting from the radio clutched at Moira's waist. Water break. No more Irish for a while. It's okay. I don't know why I can pull on it when it's, when I'm transitioning out of a normal accent. But for whatever reason, those two and just how they roll their R's differently, my brain did not want to compute. All right. Chapter 26. Entangling. Robert Paddock was almost Leo's height, but he was easily double the weight. He must have soaked in some sort of citrus cologne bath beforehand, because Leo started sneezing the moment he entered Paddock's public office. It brought to mind the taste of a sickeningly sweetened marmalade. Excuse me. Paddock's leather chair creaked as he gestured for Leo to take a seat across the desk from him. Leo sat down in a large, wheeled, brown leather chair that probably cost more than a new car. As if that wasn't enough, the chair Paddock used looked even... Even the water does it to me. It's so aggravating. As if that wasn't enough, the chair Paddock used looked even nicer. Police Chief Leo Parsons, Paddock began in a voice that was somewhere between a buzzing swarm of flies and a lawnmower. There was a resonance to it from his conical chest that probably rarely engaged his diaphragm. Welcome to the Ministry of Justice. I believe we've met before. Your face is vaguely familiar. We met when former Chief Bradburn brought me in to discuss my trial. Paddock squinted, eyes rolling into his head like dead fish floating to the surface of the ponds. Embezzlement? He asked. Leo frowned. No, sir. I shot and killed a boy named Ren. His gut still clenched, and his jaw wanted to lock at the words. But he found the more he said them aloud, the easier they were to say the next time. Snap or native? Leo opened his mouth to respond, then thought of his time with Naira, the teacher. He owed as much of his current limited motivation and drive to her as he did to his mother. Weird, considering how little interaction they truly had, but it didn't take much to leave an impression. So he cut off the word that tried to leap off his tongue, saying instead, "It was a Nolf, sir." Paddock looked relieved, and his bulk melted further into his chair. Oh, that's good. Just the one. Leo's eyebrows knit together. He hadn't been in a right mind to judge this man's character the first time they'd met. The horror and trauma had been too fresh. What he did remember was that he hadn't liked him much, even if he couldn't explain why. The explanation seemed to be coming easier than Leo expected. Once was enough to plague me for a lifetime, sir. Paddock chuckled in a weird inhalation sort of way that made him sound like a chain smoker. Not that Leo was one to talk, but at least he still had a mostly normal laugh. It's not worth losing sleep over, Parsons. He got to experience a better life in the bulb than he would have outside. Besides, we can always bring more in. Plenty of room for him, and they're probably clawing at the walls anyway. He chuckled again at his own joke, but it wasn't funny. If anything, it left Leo nauseated. Swallowing the lump in his throat, Leo forced his lips into a flat line. It was better than the frown he wanted to settle into, but he couldn't bring himself to fake a smile. All due respect, sir, but I've worked the streets. It may be better than outside, but it's still bad. Yes, well, they bring it on themselves. Leo had heard the rhetoric all his life. Nulfs are lazy and don't want to work. Give a Nulf 20 Christum and 19 of it will go to Fractal. We saved them from extinction by letting them in, and they still killed themselves off. After Leo had shot the kit, he'd gone to look at the numbers. The number of Nulfs that died in a year was about equal to the number of Sneppards. The problem was, Sneppards outnumbered Nulfs in the bulb 20-1. So if the mortality rate was equal, that meant the reality was they died with 20 times the frequency. While for Sneppards, the numbers were pretty weighted towards accidents and natural causes. For Nulfs, the numbers were skewed towards overdoses, violence, murders, and suicides. And still, people like Paddock wanted to pretend that things were fine and enough was being done. Sir, maybe a few bring it on themselves, but most do not. Most want to live a normal life. Paddock laughed. Actually laughed at that. Leo's claws bit into his own kneecaps through his pants. Parsons, if the Seed Mother wanted them to have a normal life, they wouldn't have been born natives. Living outside the bulb dulls the mind and the senses. We rescue them as a mercy, but neither they nor their children will really ever be, well, all there, if you catch my meaning. He tapped the side of his skull with a pudgy finger. Those were the stories that Sneppard kits told each other so they could turn Nulfs into easy bullying targets. But Leo had experienced the truth firsthand. Not all fractal was the judgment clouding kind. And sure, a lot of kits on the streets didn't like to use their brains, but they still had one. Sir, I've got a lot on my plate now, and you called me away from duties that are inevitably piling up in my absence. I assume you have a reason for this meeting that isn't simply wasting time. Paddock had to take a second to process this. Leo doubted anyone had ever accused a member of the 13 of wasting time, except maybe within their own circle. While this was Leo's highest boss in the chain, he was under no compulsion to like the guy. Most who tried to climb the ladder of power would have killed to be in Leo's position, but he had no desire to climb the ranks. Fanina, he didn't even want the job he had. If Paddock fired him for insubordination, it might be a blessing. A small part of him reminded him not to think that way, at least not while there was still his mother to consider. He needed work, and pissing off a 13 was a good way to earn a permanent job as a janitor or a trash collector. Decent jobs that paid well enough for someone to support themselves, but to support an ailing mother in need of constant meds. So he would compromise, find a way to be himself without being overly aggressive about it. He could stay calm. It's about the only thing he was good at. Being calm and making bad judgment calls. At least even those he did calmly. When Paddock smiled this time, it was one of discomfort. He clearly had expected Leo to grovel and kiss his rump, likely in exchange for promised favors and future promotions. He had not expected Leo to stand up to him in any capacity. And despite the visible discomfort, the smile morphed into falseness. It was reminiscent of the one that the used car salesman had worn when he promised Leo that the stain in the seat would definitely come out, and that something like a little stain shouldn't dissuade Leo from buying the car that he wanted. I make it my aim to meet every district chief, so that we can both learn what we can expect from working together. After all, we are both, you and I, first and foremost, servants of the bulb. The needs of Cyphus are to be placed above all else. But we mustn't forget, everyone in Cyphus has needs. That includes us. The way he said this last word was about how Leo imagined Anima whispering temptations in his ear. Like oil poured in the ear, it went down smooth, but it would plug everything up and keep you from hearing what you should when you should. So, Chief Parsons, what is it you need? And how might I help that need to be met? His chair squeaked again as he leaned back. I do have a reputation as a generous employer. Clearly, he believed himself to be in full control of the conversation. The one with all the cards. Leo hoped Paddock might tip backwards, but no such luck. Swallowing the bad taste in his mouth, Leo kept his expression neutral. What I need is more sleep, and for District 3 to be headed by someone competent. Right now, I can't have the luxury of either, so I just soldier on. You must want something, Chief Parsons, Paddock continued, drizzling oil in Leo's ear. Your predecessor wanted to join the 13, and he worked hard until he finally earned it. Who do you think helped him get there? I won't promise the same level of results for you, though there are still openings that need to be filled eventually, should that interest you. Leo blinked. After what he'd heard on the radio coming in, he'd wanted to ask, but hadn't been sure how to broach the subject. Not wasting the opportunity, he asked, which position did Bradburn take? Minister of Labor, the most recent vacancy, Paddock said, as if it was obvious. So he hadn't heard. Leo shook his head. It's no longer vacant. Bernetta Dolahan gave a small press conference on the radio about 15 minutes ago regarding the circumstances of her time in hiding. For the first time since Leo entered this office, now he wanted to smile. Nothing major, just a little one. He knew he shouldn't poke the deerhound, but he couldn't resist. But I'm sure you heard about that already, sir. So you must mean that you allowed Bradburn the Minister of Commerce position. You were only holding on to it temporarily anyway. How generous of you to give it up, since the Minister of Labor is still around, and her position thus unavailable for Bradburn. Paddock went from looking like he'd seen a ghost to looking like his brain was trying to escape around his eyeballs. Leo didn't miss the Minister of Justice's claws, carving tiny trails in the leather arms of his luxury chair. The door to the office slammed open. "Paddock!" Bradburn roared from the entranceway. He was breathing hard. Despite his mass, he was one of the most in-shape people Leo knew. In other words, he'd been running, probably after hearing something he didn't want to hear. Shouldn't he be happy that Dolahan was alive? One less 13 murdered? The fire in his eyes didn't look like a happy little campfire you could roast s'mores with. It looked like the kind of blaze that swept through forests and left empty fields of falling ash. His eyes fell on Leo. For a moment, it seemed like he was looking for a way to pin his frustrations there. But Leo was nice and oily from conversation with their mutual boss, so nothing stuck. Bradburn turned his attention back to the Minister of Justice, saying firmly, "Paddock, we need to talk. Something has come up." The smug look of control had drained from Paddock's face, making him almost look like a person. He cleared his throat. "I'm in the middle of a meeting with your replacement, Bradburn. It can wait." Bradburn clearly didn't like that answer. His muscles roiled under his shirt, and Leo was pretty sure the man's nice, collared shirt was about to explode. His muscles roiled under his skin, and Leo was pretty sure the man's nice, collared shirt was about to explode. Having been summoned here against his will, Leo didn't feel like sticking around. Now was a good time to beat feet. Standing from his chair, Leo turned a genuine smile to Paddock, not something he would have expected himself capable of. "We can resume it later. It will give me time to think about your offer and how to make the best use of it. Besides, I think your hands are about to be very full. So thank you for your time, Minister Paddock." Giving a quick bow, Leo ignored Paddock's protests and walked for the door. Coming to a stop beside Bradburn, he leaned in. "Seems Anima's finally stopped dogpiling me. With one less murder to solve, the rest should go much faster. For what it's worth, I told Paddock he should just make it up to you by making you Minister of Commerce. Any 13's still a 13, right, Chief?" He reached up to pat Bradburn's shoulder as he said this, and almost immediately regretted it. The look Bradburn gave him suggested that the Titan was seconds away from ripping Leo's arm off and using it to plumb his inner depths. Removing his hand, Leo instead gave a salute. "Best of luck, sir. I know firsthand how much it sucks to be pressed into a job you don't want. But unlike me, you'll be great at whatever you end up doing." "This is my life's goal and work you're mocking, Parsons. I'm gonna remember this when I'm your boss again." Leo glanced back at Paddock. "Duly noted, sir. But I'm pretty sure that position's also still taken. I think you'll find it's generally easier to fill jobs that are actually vacant." Bradburn's growl sounded like a firearm engine. "Get out!" Yeah, he'd poked the deerhound enough. Now it was Paddock's problem, and that felt like washing some of the oil out of his fur. With one final dramatic bow and wave at Paddock, Leo left the office. But he didn't relax and let himself breathe normally until he was back on the street. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" Marston's hands hovered at his sides. It was evident he wanted to shake his employer by the shoulders, and was barely keeping his hands to himself. "Do you realize what you've done, Renetta?" For her part, Renetta was lounging in the corner of a couch in her study. Marston, Moira, and Naira had all followed her from the door as soon as she'd gotten home, and here was where she'd settled. She hadn't changed out of the formal suit she'd put on to make her address. Not that anyone but her staff and the radio host had seen her in it. Bubbles rose in a constant stream in the glass of champagne she'd poured herself and now sipped from idly. Worst of all, she had the carefree, confident smile of a troublemaking student who knew you couldn't stop them from graduating because their parent was the dean. "I just realized that's the wrong perspective." I've re-entered the playing field. Marston took another step towards the couch. Someone tried to kill you before! Renetta took another sip, then gestured with her glass to Naira as she swallowed. Yes, love, but now their assassin works for me. You can't squash the rats in the walls unless you lure them out into the open. By doing this, I've forced several key players to show their hands, and can retaliate with our dear Alchemancer here whenever I choose. Naira did her best to put out the burning anger in her chest, but she couldn't keep it out of her voice. My family's safety is contingent on making it look like I'm doing what they want. Now that it's clear I failed to kill you, what's to stop them from being killed? There's a couple problems there, love, to be sure, but I took the liberty of sending someone to your house to check your mail. There were no new ransom notes, though I did pay your bills. She paused, as if waiting for a response. When she didn't get one, she provided her own. Thank you, Madame Dolahan. You're quite welcome, love. Unexpected as the gesture was, Naira was in no mood to thank her for it. Just because they haven't picked a new target for me yet doesn't mean anything. You're absolutely right, love. But I'm choosing to view it as a good sign. More importantly, we still don't know who in Cyphus has your family, or where they're keeping them. Beside her, Moira flinched and studied the floor. Naira only noticed because the girl's tail flicked hard enough to smack Naira's knee. Renetta continued. Consider this an advanced investigation tactic. Once we figure out who has your family, rest assured, my security forces will storm the proverbial castle and rescue them. You can even lead the charge if you want, and I suspect you do. It's incredibly foolish and reckless. If they die, Renetta rolled her eyes. Yes, you'll kill me. Then them, then anyone... Oh, mixing the accents. Renetta rolled her eyes. Yes, you'll kill me, then them, then anyone else who ever so much as looked at your family wrong. I should think you, of all people, would appreciate the value of a calculated gamble. Naira was seriously reconsidering the value of her own gamble, the one she'd taken in sparing Renetta Dolahan. All things considered, the value had been a net positive. A small net positive, but positive nonetheless. But this? This tipped the scales in the wrong direction, by quite a bit. You said you were gonna wait, Marston protested. Standing beside her on the couch, he loomed over the already smaller woman in a way that didn't seem to faze her in the slightest. Renetta flashed an innocent smile. Yes, well, I got bored. Besides, my position among the 13 was about to default. Moira didn't want it, and I wouldn't be a good mother if I forced her into it. So, rather than see it turned over to some ex-snop, I stepped forward and revealed the truth. That in light of multiple dead 13 and a disturbing threat letter, I, Renetta Dolahan, went into hiding for a time, faking my own death to lure out my enemies and determine my friends. Genius, no? It's not far from the truth, which just makes it an easier lie to get Cyphers to swallow. Best of all, it's already working. Now the smile turned into a confident smirk. Naira glanced down at Moira, but the girl continued to study the floor. She'd mentioned that her mother had finally brought up her plan, but Moira had remained on the fence about taking her mother's position. Naira had encouraged her to put aside any sense of duty or obligation, and only take the position if she really wanted it. It seemed Moira had made her choice, and while that made her partly responsible for the radio broadcast that endangered her family, Naira couldn't bring herself to hold any blame against the girl. Besides, it had been a few hours already. The damage was likely done. Naira couldn't dwell on it, or she'd lose all momentum. Well, go on. Ask me how it's working, Renetta prompted. All three of them stayed silent. Even Marston didn't seem to be in the mood for his employer's games. With a loud sigh, Renetta rolled her eyes. You lot are so uptight. This is a good thing that's happened. I'll tell you why. Because a couple of rats have already scurried forward. Now, I'll admit, love, the first time you suggested Paddock's involvement, I was skeptical. The man's a sleaze, but I'm beginning to think he's more cunning than I previously gave him credit for. Remember how I just said there was an ex-snop lined up to assume my place? He was an emergency candidate suggested by Paddock. A suggestion filed within 24 hours of my disappearance, no less. Knowing how long these sorts of things normally take to process, I can't prove it, but it seems like it was filed before anyone should have known I was gone. Like I said, I can't prove that, though, and Paddock's department is stonewalling my inquiries. However, it seems that Paddock knew I was supposed to disappear long before the rest of Cyphus did. Her ears were gleaming. Her eyes were gleaming now, like she just had a dessert set. Her eyes were gleaming now, like she just had a dessert set before her that was all hers. Paddock's more cunning than I realized, but he's still an idiot. If I start digging even a little, we'll uncover quite the treasure trove of dirty little secrets, I'm sure. He's a man driven by greed, and who assumes the rest of the world is too. Greed has its place, and money its uses, but he is inevitably doomed to fail, because he lacks the potential for greatness. His drive is so short-sighted, it's a wonder he can see past his own belly. Rest assured, if he is behind this, I will make sure to end him. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed these new pieces of information. Finally, Marston said, Paddock has seemed to have a dislike for you that goes back to when you were still just a candidate. Paddock has seemed to have a dislike for you that goes back to when you were still just a candidate. Dislike is a mild word befitting Mueller's. Paddock hates my guts, and I loathe him in kind. Let's not call a rabid deerhound a dope-up. Excuse me. Naira's chest was beginning to cool, though her breathing was still irregular. So you think Paddock has my family? Shrugging, Renetta swirled her glass before taking another sip. It seems the most likely answer. As quick as he's been to make sure positions get accounted for? As quick as he's been to make sure positions get accounted for? As quick as he's been to make sure positions get accounted for? And now pushing for his own candidates? Knowing Paddock, he hired someone to hire you. You said you ignored the first letter, yes? That your family disappeared after that? Naira nodded. Elaine didn't come back that night, and Tazel didn't visit when he normally does. When the second letter came, smelling of Elaine, she hadn't been able to sleep for 2 full nights. Eventually, her exhaustion had won out, but only when she'd wept herself dry. I didn't think of it at the time, Renetta said. That's a very Paddock move. In business dealings, he approaches with an initial offer. If it's rejected, he finds a way to squeeze you until you cave and take a worse deal than his first offer. He's tried it with a number of my factories, but he's yet to find success. Both because I'm stubborn and because I'm self-sufficient. But for someone without resources, I could see him finding a different way to apply pressure. Naira's lip twitched. But why me? Swirling her half-empty glass, Renetta considered. He has been a judge for almost 40 years. Every police precinct in Cyphus answers to him. With the adolescent activities you've described yourself as doing, probably wasn't hard to think of a different way to direct your unique skill set. Give yourself some credit, love. You are something of a force of nature. The more she heard, the more Naira was becoming convinced that Renetta was on the right track. If we think he has my family, then we need to act now. He's probably already heard your announcement, so we should move before he's had time to prepare, and before he does anything to them. Renetta laughed dismissively. Naira wanted to smack the champagne glass right from her fingers, but Renetta would probably have found that amusing too. If Paddock does have them, and I suspect he does, then that's very good news for us. Paddock's an idiot and a disgusting old man, but he's not stupid. He knows what you're capable of, or he wouldn't have blackmailed you into doing it. I don't think he's stupid enough to hurt your family. He's too attached to his own skin to take a risk like that. No. All we need to do is apply a little pressure of our own. And once he slips, then we strike. That's when you'll get your family back. Naira found it difficult to share in Renetta's confidence, but she admittedly knew nothing about Robert Paddock, Minister of Justice. To her, he was another isolated man of bloviated importance, with more money to his name than an entire district made in a year. Renetta's words gave Naira hope. Unfortunately, hope was a fickle thing, and it had bitten Naira far too many times to count. What about Evo, the terrorist group that's been attacking your factories? How do they fit into this? Evo had been her son's dream, one based on unifying, not fracturing. What had it become without her son behind the wheel? Renetta shrugged. I'm not sure they do. From the sound of things, they took credit for robbing a hospital last week, but I seriously doubt they have your family. Not when Paddock is such an obvious suspect. Moira's tail smacked into Naira's thigh again. Glancing over at her, Naira saw that the girl's head had nearly sunken into her shoulders. Robbing a hospital, you say? Naira asked. As she watched, Moira flinched, her folded arms tucking in tightly to her chest. Well, that might explain a few things. District 4, I believe, Renetta said. Again, it doesn't seem like they have anything to do with your family. No, Naira agreed, though it wasn't her family she was thinking of as she watched Moira squirm. The girl licked her lips, then opened them to say something, but stopped. Moira, dear, are you all right? Renetta suddenly asked. You haven't said a word since I got home. Moira flinched and jolted upright. I'm fine, she said in the way teenagers always used when attempting to shut down inquiries. To her credit, she added, It's just a lot to think about, and I'm still just happy you're okay. Renetta smiled and patted the couch cushion. Moira turned her head and pretended not to see. Moira, dearest, are you upset with me for not giving you the position? I thought you said you didn't want it. You were worried that learning business would take away from your time for learning magic. She hadn't mentioned that to Naira either. Naira watched her, and the girl met her gaze briefly before turning away in obvious embarrassment. I didn't want it. I didn't want it, Moira replied slowly. But I didn't think you'd do this. At least not so quickly. It feels like you didn't even give me a chance to reconsider. Renetta sighed, bringing her glass down to her lap. Dearest, the last thing I want is to force you into something you're not comfortable with or ready for. Excuse me. It was a big responsibility I asked of you, and I wasn't thinking of how young you are. I'm sorry. This is something an adult should do, not something a child should be forced to do. This is something an adult should do, not something a child should be forced to do. Naira could feel the young girl beside her tense. Her posture had gone impressively stiff. As locked up as the rest of her body was, her muzzle twitched, and her fingers were playing invisible piano keys in her palms. I could handle it, she snapped. Her mother seemed nonplussed by the tone she just received. Of course, Moira. But you shouldn't have to. It was wrong to ask you in the first place. There will be plenty of time to study business and gain experience when you're older. Now is the time for having fun and being young. I'm not a kid anymore, Mom. Of course not, but you're still my little girl. This was painful to listen to. She could see the genuineness of both their responses, but they seemed to lack a very basic understanding of how the other person thought. If Naira didn't do something, Moira was likely to explode. Perhaps, Naira suggested, you can show your mother what you've been learning. They both stopped to consider. After a moment, Renetta shrugged. If you've got something you'd like to show me, I do have a bit of time. Though, truthfully, I was planning on taking a nice long bath after finishing the champagne. Public speaking has a way of making me tight in a way that only a long, hot soak can fix. Moira had begun fishing out a crystal, but on hearing that her mother was already thinking ahead and looking forward to her bath, she froze. Naira nudged her and gave her an encouraging nod. They'd already explained the effects of prism and shimmer to Renetta back when they first proposed that Naira teach Moira alchemy. They'd already explained the effects of prism and shimmer to Renetta back when they first proposed that Naira teach Moira alchemy. so she didn't act surprised when Moira took a dose of Shimmer. Shimmer that Naira now had a sneaking suspicion as to where it had originated. Even Marston, fidgety as he was when alchemy was performed, was desensitized now to seeing Moira with prismatic glow in her eyes. With a quiet snap, Moira broke the crystal in her hand. It was Tarum, and Naira caught the scent the moment it reached the air. Moira tried to sing like she always did, but her eyes kept glancing nervously at her mother. Her voice was not as steady or engaged in her work as usual, evidenced by the flowers struggling to bloom around the large crack in the crystal. Renata was listening, but it wasn't clear if she was really watching or if she was still thinking about that bath. Excuse me. By the time Moira's shimmer ran out, a small ring of white flowers had grown out of the crack. Each flower was no bigger than a button, and they hadn't managed to reach full bloom. Very impressive, dearest. Moira shook her head. No, don't lie. It's not. I can do better. Her hand dug into her jacket pocket and came out with another canister of shimmer. It's quite all right, dear. It looks lovely. That was a wonderful demonstration. The canister disappeared in Moira's clenching fingers. Marvenetta's words were clearly meant to be encouraging. It was obvious she was distracted. Moira's tail flicked a wider range of motion than normal in her agitation. No, Mom. That attempt was bracking dross, but you don't care. Renetta's gaze did soften, though Moira probably couldn't notice at this point. The girl's eyes were reddening fast. Oh, Moira, I wish you wouldn't say that. Of course I care. But you're still learning, and mistakes are normal, so you shouldn't... Just stop coddling me! You started this dross after Dad died, and you've only seen me as a kid ever since, but just stop! Seed Mother, you're the worst! Her lips drew in tight, and she shook her head, first marching, then running out of the room before any tears fell. All three adults watched her go, and the room fell silent again as her footsteps quickly faded. Eventually, Renetta was the one to break the silence. Draining her glass, she sighed. I wish I remembered what sorts of things ran through my head at that age. I pride myself on knowing how to work people, but I've got no clue how to understand my own teenage daughter. Then she glanced at Naira with a smirk. Teenagers, love. A whole nother animal. Naira gave a polite smile in return. I never had to deal with a girl. Mine were both boys, and they certainly both brought their own unique challenges. Am I a bad mother? Renata asked. Of course not, madam, Marston quickly interjected. She looked up at him from the couch and sighed again. Marston, I appreciate that my money has purchased your undying loyalty, but I dislike coddling as much as my daughter. She turned to Naira with hope in her gaze, though for what outcome, Naira wasn't sure. Am I? She asked again. The honest answer? Renetta nodded. Yes, love. I have Marston here in an enormous tub in the back for when I need to be buttered up. Yes, love. I have Marston here in an enormous tub in the back for when I need to be buttered up. Naira hesitated. Yes, and no. There's things I would do very differently in your shoes. While I no longer doubt your affection for your daughter, you do have about the worst way of showing it. The last comment brought a wry smile to Madame 13's face. The drift began when her father died. It left us both floundering, but it feels like the currents only ever pulled us towards opposite shores. Is that what you want? Renetta played with the glass in her lap, making a soft ringing noise by running her finger around the rim. I want whatever's best for her, which is why I have to secure a future for her. I've come to terms with the fact that such a future may not include me. I would like it to, but perhaps it is too late. No, Naira said with a firmness that took her just as much by surprise as it did the other two. She's alive. You're alive. And while those are both true, it's not too late. When things got hard, and Rendal stopped communicating with me, I thought giving him space would help.
And I think it did, at least a little. But I should have reached out more. Even if it was painful for both of us, I should have tried. Because once he was taken from us, then it was too late. She's still here, so you've still got a chance to work things out with her. Don't waste it. Silence filled the room. Eventually, it was Marston who spoke. You do not know the daily stresses that Madame Dolahan has to deal with. She has plenty on her plate, so do not presume to... He cut off as Renetta laid a hand against his arm. Is she wrong? As the question sunk in, he deflated. No, madam. It'll probably benefit you both for you to speak to Moira. She nodded. Then that is what I shall do. After my bath. Warm tears streaked down her cheeks as Moira ran. It was infuriating. All of the... well, everything was so stupidly unfair. She hated herself for crying, hated her mother for pretending to have interest in her daughter's life, hated Naira for telling her to try something she'd known deep down would fail, hated Marston for hating Naira, hated the people who wanted her mother dead, hated the people who had Naira's family, hated... Oh. She hated herself for not telling Naira about her son. She'd wanted to bring it up when they were talking about Evo. She'd held onto this information now for a week. Wouldn't Naira be mad at her for not telling her sooner? Then Naira would be... Then Naira would be well within her rights to refuse to teach any more alchemy. She had enough of a head start on the subject, and she was smarter than most people gave her credit for. If Naira left tomorrow, Moira could still figure out and practice magic without her. Excuse me, wow. She was just another stupid adult after all. That wasn't fair. Naira was one of the cooler adults Moira knew. She joined Sergei on a very short list that Moira kept of cool adults in Cyphus. Many names have been crossed from that list over the years. Like Siev, the stupid boy who treated her like one of the cool kids, just long enough to get her hopes up. Then he'd yank the rug out from under her because, we're too cool for you. Seed Mother, why was she even thinking about him at all? She resolved, then and there, to forget him forever. Besides, she had her mother to be mad at right now, so one person at a time. She wandered the house for a long time. Passing security guards checked on her since her stupid eyeballs were leaking, but she ordered them to leave her alone, and they did. No one seemed to be trying to track her down. Nobody cared. Let her throw her tantrum, they were probably thinking. Kids need to cry to feel better. Ugh. She was so sick of being young and short and just all of it. Her fists balled up in frustration, and she slammed one into the frame of a door. It was cold. Frowning, she wiped her tears away with her free hand and got her bearings. This was the door to the garage. She'd managed to wander all the way to the west end of the house. Why was it cold? The sun had just set. Today wasn't a storm day, and the garage was insulated anyway, so... Then she heard it. The distinctive crackling of ice forming on the other side of the door. Her first instinct was to throw open the door, so without stopping to consider any other options, that's what she did. It swung open easily, since it only locked on the other side, but caught on something halfway through its swing. Ow! Someone hissed. Part of Moira knew she should probably call for help. After her previous run-in with the guards, they were actively avoiding her so as not to make her mood any worse. At the moment, she wasn't emotionally present enough to care about safety or her own well-being. Curiosity was the only current motivator worth following. Peeking around the door, we found a Nolf, hunched over and rubbing their knee with slow circles. They were dressed in all black, like they were cosplaying a ninja or something. A backpack lay open beside the door, and Moira caught reflected light off a collection of small crystals inside. Pushing her way out the door caught the Nulf off guard, and they stumbled backward, muttering something and rubbing at their knee. Moira closed the door behind her, hearing the satisfying click as it locked. "Oh, why'd you go and do that? I need it in there," the Nulf complained in a familiar voice. Yes, the mohawk was hidden under a black mask. Yes, Moira had trouble distinguishing between lanky men and fit females with Nulfs once they were a certain height. But she knew that voice immediately. Crossing her arms, she leaned back against the door. Too emotionally drained to be reverent, Moira did nothing to stop the disappointment in her voice. "What are you doing, Naomi?" "I could be anyone," Naomi said, straightening up and covering the end of her muzzle with gloved hands. "Naomi, I'm not stupid. You look ridiculous. What are you doing here?" Naomi paused for a few long moments, then her shoulders slumped. Reaching up, she pulled back the mask and tried to floof her mohawk back into place. Without gel, it only kind of worked. She dyed the ends pink now, and Moira stared at it. It's not a color she would have expected to work for this Amazonian warrior goddess of a Nulf. But, like everything Naomi did, it looked good. "Believe it or not, Pips, I was actually looking for you." "You're right," Moira said. "I don't believe you. And my name is Moira." "Yeah, I know that," Naomi said, shaking her head as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Wait, are you... Why are you crying when you bashed my knee with the door? And why are the doors to your house made out of steel anyway? Had a fanina of a time just getting in here." She paused. "You're not crying because I called you Pips, right?" "Of course not," Moira snapped. "I'm crying because, well, because I'm stupid, so don't worry about it." "Whatever you say, Pips," Naomi said, as she tested putting weight on her statuesque leg. It held without much pain, it seemed, because she was walking on it soon after. She glanced around the garage, admiring the various vehicles parked in here. Between the private limos her mother used, the personal car they'd commissioned so Sergei could fit in the driver's seat, the armored vehicles security used, and the line of hoverbikes on the far wall, there were a lot of vehicles to see. "Any of these yours?" "No, it's all Mom's. She has Sergei drive me places in that one, though, so it's basically mine." "So it's basically mine," Moira said, pointing to it. Following her point, Naomi let out a whistle. "Nice, Pips. I forgot you had a personal driver and everything." She paused to inspect the vehicle. "No offense, but I would have expected your ride to have wheels. Thought your mom was supposed to be loaded." Moira snorted. "Mom is loaded, but rubber has to be custom imported from Kodogen. Rubber's already expensive, and then you add on the cost of shipping and security for that long of a journey through the jungle. You can buy 100 luxury Magpulse cars for the cost of a single car with wheels." "Yeah, but you can take a car with wheels off-road." "Don't remind me," Moira sighed, then admitted. "I did ask. She said maybe for my second or third car." As Naomi continued to wander, Moira looked around the garage for any other intruders. She saw none, though a side door hung ajar, and the handle looked like it had been snapped off. Nothing about Naomi was subtle. "You said you're here for me, so what do you want? Dressed up like that, is this a kidnapping or something? Planning to stuff me in your backpack?" "Maybe," Naomi said, running her hand along the edge of a resting limo. "Could be fun, and you're certainly small enough." Looking down at the backpack, Moira was pretty sure she wouldn't fit. She soon came to the unhappy realization that she couldn't be sure without trying. "So, what then?" I need a favor." "And your friends can't help you with it?" No, not really." Moira sighed. "What do I have that they don't?" Naomi hesitated a moment. "Besides charm, humor, and a refreshing lack of testosterone? Money." There it was. "Dolahans have a family policy against handouts. Sorry." Naomi walked back towards her, watching her own knee like she expected it to buckle, though it never looked even close to teetering. Siev said that you brought a bag of crystal the first time you came to visit, but never used it. I was hoping I could borrow it. Borrow it? Without intention of returning it, Naomi added. Without intention of returning it, Naomi added. Moira sighed again. This was how all her school friendships ended up. The moment people realized how much more money she had than them, they flocked to her. Until she no longer bought them stuff. Then suddenly their other friends were funnier and prettier and way more interesting than her. So she didn't need to bother with friends anymore. Look, I need a lot of money, and my options were to rob a bank or rob you. One seemed like a more realistic option. First of all, rude. Second of all, no, still rude. Third of all, money doesn't buy happiness, and it's not as great as everyone thinks it is. No, Naomi admitted, but it can post bail. Moira blinked, caught off guard by what felt like a non sequitur. What? Naomi's thumb rubbed anxious circles into the back of her knuckles. They publicized Rolf's bail a couple days ago. 25,000 Christum. Then it clicked for Moira. Why Naomi would do something as dumb as think her only options were to rob a bank or to rob a 13. 25,000 Christum was as much allowance as Moira made in 2 years. That would pay for 4 years of study at Fossman University, or 2 degrees from Cyphus Tech. She couldn't be sure, but that was probably 8 years' worth of work for Sergei. Her mother dealt in large sums, yes, but that was still a significant amount of money. And as frugal as her mother was, Renetta Dolahan owned the 3 largest battery factories in Cyphus, and had enough money to successfully bid for the position of Minister of Labor. She hadn't risen to that point by throwing money away. It seemed at once unlikely that her mother would part with such a sum. How long is his sentence? Naomi scowled. He's still awaiting trial, but rumor is that the minimum would be 15 years. He, Erds, and Taz actually fought a guard and an off-duty snop, which is how he got arrested. But Erds and Taz just ran like mulings with their tails tucked so far between their legs it's a wonder they didn't get fur in their nose. Worse, a couple high-risk patients on the first floor were permanently anesthetized, and a number of hospital staff suffered permanent internal organ damage because Taz bracked up his ratios with the Necrum. So they're wanting to pin that on Rolf, which means they might be able to push his punishment to a life sentence on counts of manslaughter. And your friends won't help? Naomi snorted. What are they gonna do? Turn themselves in? Then we'd all be left to rot in jail for the rest of our days. No, Taz is too determined to keep going to think about turning around for Rolf. Then she snarled, eyes darting to the side. I told him we had to go back right then. I should have just gone. Better to get caught with Rolf than leave him all alone. Taz never intended to go back. I knew that, and I still... Seed Mother, I'm a Mueller too. Moira grimaced. She wanted to help. It would feel incredible to know that this woman who had everything she could ever want, height, power, grace, magic, still needed Moira. That Moira still had at least one thing that made her special and useful. But there was just no way her mother would spring for it, especially to save a Nulf from prison. I'm sorry, Naomi. The Nulf rolled her eyes. I didn't come here for sympathy. I came here because I'm desperate. Rolf and I are all we've ever had. We were both rescues, so we've been family for each other as long as I can remember. When we both got old enough for the orphanage to dump us on the streets, Ren found us, and then Evo became family. But that family took a hit when he died. Things have decayed ever since. In all of it, Rolf has been my anchor, and I refuse to lose him. So, can you help me? Moira tapped a finger on her arm. Naomi, when I showed up with the bag of money you're talking about, that was only 1,200 Christum. I don't really have access to my mom's money, and it's not like she keeps some giant stash of Christum in a secret basement vault. Naomi tilted her head, then nodded with understanding. She pointed to her bag. Well, I brought tools. Moira shook her head. No, I'm serious. There's no secret vault here. My mom's got dozens of bank accounts, and her wealth is spread out that way. So if you want my mom's money, you might have to go with your first plan and rob a bank. Bringing her hand to her chin, Naomi considered. What if we go with your idea, Pips, and I stuff you in my bag and take you hostage? Think your mom would give me ransom money? Think your mom would give me ransom money? Moira narrowed her eyes, suddenly realizing that Naomi was being serious. Again, rude. You get that bag anywhere near me, and I'll call for security so fast, I swear to Seed, Mother. Besides, it wouldn't work either. My mom wouldn't do that for me. I am her problem child, not worth the trouble. She's got enough security, she'd probably just send them after you instead of cooperating. Well, I'm running out of options, Pips, and that one's actually sounding like the most promising one. Naomi was running on hope, and that hope was fizzling out. If Moira didn't suggest something to sustain that hope, she was definitely ending up in a bag. Look, I'll talk to Mom. If I tell her it's to help out a friend in trouble, she might go for it. She says she worries about me and making friends at school, so maybe I can play on that. But I won't promise any results. I really don't think she'll go for it. It was something, and that seemed to be enough for Naomi for now. She nodded. Thanks, Pips. That's a solid plan A. And if it doesn't work, we'll have kidnapping as plan B. You're not kidnapping me. You're not kidnapping me, Naomi, Moira said in her best imitation of her mother's authoritative voice. Right. Of course not, Naomi said. It's just a joke. Because you're going to convince your mother, right? Didn't feel like much of a joke. Moira sighed and restated, I'm going to try. Naomi gave her a thumbs up. Cool. Let's go see her. Right. Because marching a Nulf in to ask her mother for help in bailing another Nulf who had actually committed a serious crime out of jail. Timing. Was definitely going to work. Knowing she couldn't exactly tell Naomi that, Moira shook her head. I should talk to her alone. What? So you can call security on me and get me thrown out? Moira rolled her eyes. If I'd wanted to call security on you, Naomi, I would have done it ages ago. I do actually want to help you. Truthfully, you're the only cool member of Evo. Naomi beamed at that. I knew I liked you, Moira. Using her actual name to gain trust and sympathy points, Moira would have been frustrated if it wasn't working. Seed Mother, this was such a bad idea. Trust me when I say that I think I have a better chance of convincing her to give us the money if I talk to her by myself. So just stay here and try not to break anything else. Slowly, Naomi nodded. Yeah, okay. You go talk to your mother, and I'll work on another plan B for the money. Her gaze traveled over the numerous vehicles parked in here. Unrelated and unimportant question. How much is your car worth? Moira rolled her eyes. Probably have to sell 10 of the cars in here to get the money you need. I'm not helping you steal that much from my mother. But it is an option? Yeah, but a bad one. That's all I need right now, Naomi said quietly. Not run out of options. She looked at Moira then with a melancholic expression. While Moira felt a fresh wave of sympathy, it was accompanied by fear. This was the woman who'd turned against her friend in the back of that ambulance. There was even less reason for her not to turn on Moira. But what was Moira going to do? Turn her over to the guards so she could be locked up too? Just the thought of that felt wrong. Almost as wrong as not telling Naira about her son. One problem at a time, Moira said aloud, more for her own benefit than Naomi's. The girl nodded anyway, offering a wry smile. Don't come back empty-handed. Yeah, Moira thought as she unlocked the door and slipped back inside. I'm in so much trouble. Woo. Well, my throat is killing me after doing Paddock's voice. Turns out, trying to go for the whole buzzing flies mixed with a lawnmower thing, not great long term. So I'm probably going to stop there, especially because this next chapter is very long. I remember this chapter and I remember it well. It's very long, so we'll probably pick up with it next time. But we got 2 more chapters down. We got meet Robert Paddock. We got to see some of the aftermath of Renetta uh, announcing that she is in fact very much alive, and that Paddock and Bradburn don't get what they want. And now, yeah, Moira just has to figure out how to, raise $25,000 so that she doesn't get kidnapped. Easy, right? Oh, Moira, Moira, Moira. Poor girl. That comes later in the book. We gotta get there first. Ah. Yeah. Yeah. I don't remember exactly what inspired me to make her magic work through her singing, but once I realized how much she loved music, I thought it was a fun twist, especially with Sneppards having stronger hearing than most people. So I was like, hey, this could be a fun way to give her something unique in how she engages with magic. Because everyone can do magic, but, you know, they have to learn how to do it. And turns out she can't learn the traditional way. And music is great. Exactly. And what is music but good math? Oh, poor Moira in math. She keeps wanting all these really cool things and then learning that there's all these really obnoxious things that, she needs to have in order to have them. All these hoops to jump through. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Yep. 22 pages for the next chapter. It's a long one. But it's also a juicy one. So hopefully you guys are looking forward to it next time. We've been learning about people, and it's gonna keep going. We're gonna be uncovering more secrets. So more dirty laundry. So yeah, I look forward to that next time. Can't wait to see you guys next week. Thank you for coming. Have a great night. Bye, everyone.